when people talk about you, they smile.
I love the smile, and I hope I make people smile. It's one of the deepest tools in our evolutionary toolkit for making people cooperate and sharing minds and syncing up with each other. And I think those experiences taught me, like, the best antidote to that is to be kind, is to reach out to people, even if they're being harsh to you, and build ties. So I think that life taught me to connect to people and make them smile.
Welcome to the Midlife Chrysalis podcast with Chip Conley, where we explore how midlife isn't a crisis, but a chrysalis, a time of profound transformation that can lead to the most meaningful chapter of your life.
Welcome to the Midlife Chrysalis. This is Chip Conley. And one of my neighbors when I'm in Baja is the world's leading expert on awe. And you know that when the world's leading expert on awe lives nearby you live in a really great place because Dacher Keltner, we met years ago, and I sort of introduced him to Baja. We met actually in Baja. I think we had met once before, but we met in Baja right where I had a home, and I was in the early stages of thinking about MEA and creating MEA, and he fell in love with the place, bought a place down there, and so he lives within walking distance of the MEA campus. This is a place which has breaching whales and hatching sea turtles on the beach, all right next to the campus. So this conversation we had was really focused on the positive components of humanity, but also why awe is such an important part of us getting older and feeling like we're part of something much bigger than ourselves. I think you're going to enjoy this one. He's a magnetic and lovable human. So enjoy this episode. Dacher Keltner, welcome to the Midlife Chrysalis, my friend.
It's good to see you, Chip, as always. And
I do miss our pozole in Todos Santos on Thursday nights.
Oh, you're making me nostalgic.
I just want to start by saying, you have been one of the longest standing MEA faculty members, teaching every December. I want to just say that one of the things that's most noticeable about you that is when people talk about you, they smile. So there's an element of Dacher's the kind of person who makes you smile. Why is that, Dacher? What in your origin story makes you lovable, approachable, and how did that influence your process of being an academic who's well known for compassion and awe and what it means to born to be good? Tell us more.
Yeah, and that's a deep question to start. But actually, it's in the middle of life, as Mia really reveals to people when they take your courses and are enjoying those experiences. We start to go into the deep origins of who we are, and I love the smile, and I hope I make people smile. It's one of the deepest tools in our evolutionary toolkit for making people cooperate and sharing minds and syncing up with each other. We contagiously imitate other people's smiles. They calm our bodies. So I'm glad people are smiling around me. Yeah, I think that, in some sense, the deep origins of why I want to make people smile is, I think in part, it comes from being raised by parents who really believed in alternatives to kind of our hyper individualism of our culture and to feel communal. And they taught me that. And I think that part of it, Chip, was, and you and I have similar backgrounds in some ways, like having certain experiences as a young person where I felt on the margins. I was the last person. I was very small as a kid and went to a sports dominated high school that wasn't interested in academics, and I just felt ostracized because I was the smallest kid of 350. And then I went to England in junior year in high school and I was bullied for a year. And I think those experiences taught me, like, the best antidote to that is to be kind, is to reach out to people, even if they're being harsh to you, and build ties. So, and then, falling into it scientifically and studying, being around Buddhist monks and, Matthew Ricard and Dalai Lama who just make people smile and make people tear up and get goosebumps and out of our social connection. So I learned I was kind of a grouchy kid, and I think that life taught me to, like, connect to people and make them smile.
You started studying psychology, and tell us, for those who don't know your story, tell us the story of how you got to where you are today at UC Berkeley, and maybe the scholarship that has, led to the books you've written.
The why you and I are in conversation right now and why I've taught for Mia about awe and compassion for however long it's been, 7 or 8, 10 years. I was raised by a visual artist, and then, my mom taught literature at Cal State Sacramento, and they were both interested in passion and emotion and, and the horrors of war and the beauties of poetry and the passion and the awe we feel about the sublime and music and nature. And that was my childhood. And I grew up in Laurel Canyon and rock and roll and drugs. And, I was 8 years old, like, look what adults do, And then I went to grad school where you were an undergrad and a grad student. I was at Stanford. We have mutual friends like Nathan Brostrom, and it was really the peak of cognitive science at the time, and it was like the mind is a computer, we have algorithms, we're information processors, and I was like, "Where is the passion? Where's the emotion in the mind, in our lives?" And it was really absent in science, social science at the time, and then I went and heard a talk by Paul Ekman, who is now in hospice care and, a mentor of mine, and I wanna revere him for a moment. And he was this outsider, and he gave this talk, and, now he's famous, and he's like, he had figured out how to code the face and, figure out what emotion is in the face anatomically. And Chip, it was like I'm almost tearing up now. It was like a spiritual experience for me. I had grown up looking at paintings. My dad painted us, and I was just so visually oriented, and here was a scientist who was like, "I can find emotion in the face," and I literally was awestruck, and that became my career, and I'll say one final thing, when I started that career, it was all fight or flight emotion, it was anger and disgust and fear, and I was raised in the spirit of humanism, almost like what you've cultivated and Esalen, and, like, humans have all this remarkable goodness in us. The Buddhists, like our basic human goodness, it was not there in science. And I was like, all right, let's go. And so compassion and gratitude and love and awe and beauty have been my big inquiries in science.
One of your books is called Born to Be Good, and yet we live in a time that feels so at odds with that in terms of how we are treating each other, how we see each other, no matter what side of the political aisle you're on. How are you reconciling this in your mind and in your heart? And it must be hard for you, uh, because there's a talk about the premise of the book, and it's hard for me because I talk about karmic capitalism and what goes around comes around. It might take a while, and then I see, unfortunately, so people who seem to be successful in life are often the ones who are brutal. And so tell us about that.
The first book, Born to Be Good, came out of like my reaction to kind of this, very self-focused science of emotion that was its first chapter. And I was like, what about love and touch and gratitude and laughter and joy and, sharing pozole and todos santos on Thursday nights and like walking out of there arm in arm, like this is the most meaningful moment in life. And I think, in the last 40 years, we've seen this revolution in thinking about human beings as, fundamentally cooperative, sharing as a propensity, ready to sacrifice, full of compassion, built into our genes. And yet, today, we're in what I feel is an era of moral ugliness, of, people privileging self-interest more than ever as the Amazon burns, and privileging white supremacy when, people of color are being punished. And so it is disturbing to me. I think a lot of it, how do I think about it? I think a lot of it is the algorithms that were set at Meta and Instagram and Twitter, uh, mistaken algorithms, and then the biases of online life, which are not life, but yet take up 7 or 8 years of our conscious life. And when people come to Mia and they put away their phones and they suddenly are like, human beings are incredible, and look at all this stuff that comes out of us. So yeah, how I think about it is we have these capacities. They've been stunted by online bullying and being ghosted and the images and things that you see online, but it's a good fight, and we'll figure out alternatives.
Talk about some of the science behind that Born to Be Good. The idea that because there's an element that was a bit of a surprise for a lot of people that there's a it's not survival of the fittest necessarily. It's maybe the survival of the kindest.
Yeah, thank you. And Chip, I just got goosebumps, because I appreciate what a deep reader you are. I think you're probably the best reader of anybody I know.
Bob, come on.
Not only do you read prolifically, but you remember the core, s you know, seeds of the book, which is why you're a great writer too. Yeah, 50 years ago, if and it's interesting to think this is really prominent in Western thought, in our lineage back to original sin and evil and basic human badness. And the science was like that. It was like there are selfish genes. Humans are fight or flight gratification machines, and we just want to prevail. And then, Born to Be Good was to start capturing all these scientific discoveries that have only grown over time. Oxytocin, we have a little chemical in our body that makes us open to other people and share. That's amazing to me, that the nervous system is wired to care and share. We share around the world about 40% of a resource when we're given a chance. Just like you give scholarships to Mia, it's just like we just have this instinct to share. We have parts of our brain, when we feel compassion for other people, as I report in Born to Be Good, it's a very old part of the brain, the periaqueductal gray. So that tells us compassion is mammalian. It's just caring is fundamental. Now, Michael Tomasello, has this amazing work, little kids, 18 months old, you give them all these tasks to share or help someone and they'll do it. They're not little selfish beasts, they will see an adult struggling to do something and they'll be like, oh, I'll help that guy. I don't know him, but I'll help him. So there's just all of these data starting to show, the research up at Oregon of like, when am given money, parts of my dopamine circuitry are activated. When I give away that money, the same region of the brain is activated. Giving is just like receiving. I think that just led to this reformulation of who we are. We're not selfish by nature. We're selfish and profoundly selfless, and Born to Be Good was early in the game. And thank you for quoting Darwin. Darwin said, sympathy is our strongest instinct, and the communities that promote sympathy will flourish. And he was right. And people forget he said that. So I still give talks to audiences, and they're like, who is this Berkeley guy who hangs out in Baja? Why? How could he say that? But there's a lot of good data that support it.
So, I remember a few years ago when you were starting to work on Awe,
Yeah,
A-W
you and I are.
AWE, and you said Goosebumps, and at one point I said, "Oh, yeah, I think the name of the book should be Goosebumps," but, I instead the name of the book is called Awe,
Yeah,
and this was almost 3 years ago that it came out, and wow, that book
yeah.
that book, I want you to really give us the scholarship that you did on awe, how you discovered these 8 common pathways to awe, and then we're gonna unpack the surprising fact that number 1 and number 2, are really what MEA is all about. And it's very interesting when you first told me this. And number 2, you and I talked about a good amount because it was a topic that I was fascinated with, studying festivals.
which I still wanna do. I'm getting there.
Give us the big picture on this topic of awe. What is awe? Why maybe wasn't it studied as much previously? And, what did you learn about these 8 most common pathways?
Yeah, and, for our folks listening, you know, Chip and I began a conversation about Mia and awe. We had intersected and shared Esalen and many things, but really from the beginning moments, and you're why I'm in Baja, Chip, and gratefully so. And there's so
Decker
much,
Decker has a Decker has a home in Baja, just to
yeah.
be clear. Yeah, yeah.
And as an interweaving, I think Mia is a space of awe as powerful as almost anything you could find. So, I was this emotion scientist and had used the tools of neuroscience and measuring facial actions and studying neurotransmitters and the vagus nerve and vocalizations and just doing basic science. And I had long been interested in awe because of my childhood and, the most meaningful moments of life, having children and seeing Nelson Mandela come out of prison and, being at concerts, going to festivals, the Grateful Dead back in the day. And, just like, what is it? I remember interacting with Paul Ekman when I was starting my career. And I said, Paul, he's a founding figure in emotion science. And I was a young guy and I was like, I'm a young scholar. Like, what emotions should I study? And he said, awe. And then I finally got to a place in my career and received a lot of funding. And I was like, people laugh at me and like, oh, there's the Berkeley guy studying awe, isn't that what a cliche? Just like you starting Mia, and it's like, what, I believe in this. Like,
Yeah.
and this is fundamentally human. Awe is an emotion we feel when we encounter things that are beyond our frame of reference, usually vast. The view of the Pacific Ocean at Baja, whales, breaching and the like. I mean, so much. And then it's mysterious. We don't understand it in that moment of consciousness. It's like, and that then means we can almost feel awe all the time. It's as long as we cultivate a sense of curiosity and mystery. I started to chart the basic qualities of awe, you know, it goosebumps, piloerections, your skin just so alive. Walt Whitman, the body electric, the vagus nerve, the warming of the chest, the tearing, the sense of humility, the sense of being, as Jane Goodall said, amazed by things that are outside of the self, pieces of music and amazing character of other people. And then that led to your question or seeking an answer to your question. Like, well, where do we find this? And what we did is, and this is the core of the book, and it's almost like a MIA curriculum, which is like we asked people from 26 countries to write stories of awe. And this was inspired by William James in his book, Varieties of Religious Experience, where he really relied on stories.
An amazing book, by the way.
Ah, my
Yeah.
God.
Just, it's a book, so say it again just so everybody, heard it
Yeah,
properly.
please read The Varieties of Religious Experience because it's such an important book for our times, because what he says is every experience of spirit and awe is your unique experience, but we all share the experience with our fellow human beings. So it's like the American dream of diversity plus shared common humanity. It's an incredible book. So yeah, we gather these stories from India and Mexico and Japan and Russia and China and Chile and US and all these different countries. And we come up with what we call the 8 wonders, where we find awe, which is nature, moral beauty, music, visual patterns. The one you and I talked a lot about, which is collective effervescence, just like vibrating together, whether it's a sporting event, or a dance or a festival or walking in the streets of New York City. Big ideas, the life cycle, and spiritual practice, just like meditating and thinking about the divine or having an experience with a spiritual practitioner or psychedelics or spirit medicines. And those 8 things are where we find it. And what I love about those, Chip, is they're just humanity, It's just like art and music and dancing with other people and thinking about how courageous someone is in their lives. Nature, so accessible. And that is just for our audience out there, what we also found is people are feeling awe a lot. They're feeling awe a couple times a week. It's really good for your immune system. It's good for your heart. We just published a paper you don't even know about where people battling long COVID who practice awe have fewer symptoms of long COVID, you know? So it's right there for us, and we just need to activate it.
So the practicing of awe would be maybe one of these common pathways, but let's number I think the big surprise for many people was nature was number 3 on the list, not number 1 or number 2. Number 1 and number 2 were pro-social. Do the countdown. Give us number 2. Let's talk about that, and then give us number 1, and what whether that was a surprise for you.
It was really surprising, that and if I'm mapping onto your portrayal of the findings, the number 2 was just collective experience, of, just like sharing dancing and music or a sporting event or what Emil Durkheim called collective effervescence. I was just in New York City for a couple of events and just like the vibrancy of the people there and just like, you know, being together. And then number 1 is moral beauty, which was that.
Well, let's go. I wanna stick with collective
Yeah,
effervescence for just a moment. So, when I first went to Burning Man, God, 30 years ago, that's what I experienced, and I started studying Durkheim because Emil Durkheim, sort of in the same era as William James a little bit, long time ago, he studied religious pilgrimages, and in Durkheim is a French sociologist, and he coined this term collective effervescence, and my shorthand way I described it was the idea, like, somehow your sense of ego separation starts to dissolve, your sense of communal joy or connection, emerges, and, it can happen, in all kinds of environments. Glide Memorial Church, I was on the board there in the Tenderloin of San Francisco, the gospel choir. I mean, just getting up on your feet and dancing and singing and just expressing with a group of people you don't even know, what an elevated experience that can be. If you were to say to someone, "Go out and practice some
yeah,
awe,"
yeah,
it's pretty clear what practicing awe when it comes to
I
nature
agree.
means, but what does it mean practicing awe when it comes to collective effervescence?
Yeah, and I love your scholarship here, Chip, and, Durkheim said, like, the core to our religion is moving together with others, and then the elevated feeling that comes out of that, and a lot of our contemporary life has taken that away from us. We don't go to picnics, we don't see movies together like we used to, we don't, shop, we don't move in a marketplace together, although that's coming back, and the practice is to remember that and to seek it out. And there's just all this fascinating new data showing that, people feel when they go to farmers markets, they feel not only do they love the vegetables, but they love the vibrating and patterns of movement together at the farmers markets.
And what is that happening on a sort of like a nervous system level? What is it? What's the physical reason for that?
Yeah, and that's another very new cutting edge area of science, which is how we synchronize with others in bodily movement, hormone levels. We've studied that. The brain patterns start to sync up. You and I are starting to sync up. We're constantly syncing up. And I think that's what Durkheim was getting at is the basic mechanism of this is synchronization with others. And the ego boundaries start to dissolve, like you said. And then the practice is to find that wherever you feel safe and joy, right? It could be a farmer's market. It could be singing together. It could be dancing together. For me, it was pickup basketball for 30 years. That was church. It was just like I'd go and we'd start singing and I would love the human beings I was with, and suddenly you realize it's everywhere, like Durkheim postulated. Like when I walk across the Berkeley campus and we're all moving in a pattern towards a class, that's like I feel I feel part of something bigger than the self. I feel a little bit of awe. So you just got to cultivate this awareness of that.
Has there been much research on what screens do for us or don't do for us? The idea that in real life has a more profound effect on the nervous system around this?
Chip, you're you just hit three fundamental scientific advances. So thank you. Yeah, you know, I I'm working on this book on moral beauty, and the what screens do is they disrupt all of our synchronization. They're asynchronous. So if your friend doesn't respond to your text read online, you feel ghosted. That's different than ordinary face-to-face interaction. There's a study of Yale in conversation with people. We become synchronized. We move our bodies, our brains start sort of synchronizing, less so when we're online. A lot, if you just step back and you think for a moment, here's my favorite example. There's a new source of childhood agitation for children, which is they're playing and they're on a play structure and they're learning so much, or they're exploring a little stream or a garden. And they look over at their parents, and their parent has the face of looking into the phone. And they get mad. The kids get mad because they're no longer synced up with their parents, right? So I feel, yes, we get envious when we look at Instagram. Yes, teenagers feel anxious online, but perhaps the bigger effect is the disruption of synchronization in our lives. It's just changed it. We used to share music together. When you and I were in college, we'd buy an album. We'd like, come on in, man, check this out,
Yeah, and listen. Yeah,
and now
yeah,
it's like, put it in and
yeah,
you're on your
yeah.
own. So it's real trouble.
All right, let's go to number 1 on the list. Moral beauty. When I tell people this, they're like, "What are you talking about?" But I will say that Maria Shriver, who was actually the very first guest on on this podcast, the first time she and I ever spent time in person, and Hoda Kotb was with us, and it was the 3 of us down in Cabo, not in Baja at our MEA campus, but just down in Cabo. And I was supposed to hang out with him for an hour, and after about 3 or 4 hours, we were like, "Oh my god, can the 3 of us get married?" And 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 I said to Maria, "Maria, you're a moral beauty." And she just started crying, like, and it was so express what that means. What does moral beauty mean?
Yeah, your story really hits me. That's really nice. And crying is so interesting, because crying, there are many kinds of tears. It's a very complicated physiological process. And one kind of tears is, what older theologians wrote about, the tears of grace, when you feel like the divine has touched all of you. And that probably was happening in that moment. It's just like, you know, when I first started the science of awe, people are like, "No, what do you mean by that?" Oh, that happens to me all the time. And moral beauty is like that too, which is moral beauty, which has in scholarship, it's interesting, like in the social sciences, we got really interested in physical beauty, and then there's an aesthetics literature. Why is a painting beautiful? But humans are beautiful, and some of our most profound moments in life are when we encounter the courage or kindness or sense of justice or humility of other people. And it can change our life. I remember, you know, and I remember teaching at Mia, and you were there, and it was a very poignant moment because I think it was a December and early in Mia, and we were all I was talking about how my brother was soon to pass away, and he was a person of moral beauty for me. And and then I went, and he passed away in January, and being near his side and just watching him leave this earth, and then really it's sinking in like he was a person of moral beauty to me. He was fighter against the racism that was directed at his wife, who was Asian American. He taught the poorest kids in the Sierras how to speak, and these are kids who are getting really in trouble in life. And my brother was right there just helping them. And, he was just the compass for me. And it changed my life. And that's moral beauty. It's when you sense something in Maria Shriver and her commitment to things in life. You're like, for Chip Conley, it's like, what she's doing is how I want to live my life. Yeah, I was doing this exercise looking at a Van Gogh painting, and Van Gogh or Van Gogh, was just ever since I was 16, I'm like, I love this guy, and so does the world. And it turns out like he was interested in mental struggles, and he was interested in the marginalized in life, like I have been, in my science, the the drunks and the prostitutes and the people who struggle, and really devoted the potato eaters and was interested in the poor. And so moral beauty is that emotion when you encounter someone and they move you to pursue what you care about in life. And it usually is around themes of like, you want to practice kindness, or you want to give to someone, or you want to fight for justice, or you're
Yeah.
courageous, like you want to help others overcome obstacles. And that's, it's sad that our culture doesn't immediately know what it is, because it's everywhere, and it's a life-defining moment for so many of us that we need to bring back.
One of the things you said to me, before the book came out is, "Chip, you know, we have the nature we got all 8 of them, but, like, the first 2, we got collective effervescence and moral beauty in spades, and, it's just such a magical experience to be able to be in a place where you feel elevated by both the collective connection, but also the witnessing, being an enlightened witness of people who elevate your spirit and say, like, if she can do that, I can do that."
And the circles, the sharing that you have every morning of where we are, and, life has hardship, and this is where we are, and other people are feeling that, you know, a physical issue, a relationship issue, and financial, whatever it is. And suddenly all this goodness comes pouring forth. And that's moral beauty. It's just like sensing the humanity of others.
Let's shift for a moment and move into midlife, and why is cultivating awe or seeking moral beauty or collective effervescence particularly important in midlife and beyond? And also tell us about awe walks.
You and I have talked about this, and it's so cool that you profile this as a core principle of, in the middle of life, the happiness curve, there's just a dip, right? And you're questioning a lot of stuff. And what that means is, with the right mindset and practice and building of life, you can change that trajectory, right? And and the middle of life, you really start wondering about the purpose of it all. Like, why am I here, and what am I meant to give? And you created Mia, and bold move, and that's just a deep pursuit in the middle of life. And then you also wonder, it's almost like Jane Goodall's notion, and may she rest in peace, what a person of moral beauty, right? Well, what is outside of my pleasures and my successes that I want to give to and create? What's bigger than me? And so you're asking those questions in the middle of life. And awe is the pathway to that. It is the pathway to revealing the big things you want to be part of in life, you know? And those are hard to figure out in our times. Our times are very individualistic, coming out of COVID, this political time. What are the big things that I want to be part of? We don't turn to church like we used to. Only 55% of Americans really rely on church. We are more isolated. So what is the big thing you want to be part of? And awe does that for you, And when people have their big experiences of awe, they're like, oh, I want to work on saving carnivores, or which I just spoke to a carnivore society and I was like, wow, wolves are fascinating, or I want to be part of a chorus and that will become my temple, or I want to help young kids and mentor them as you do. And so, awe is a great midlife emotion. And then, the collective effervescence, when you think about 40% of Americans who are over the age of 65 feeling lonely, and this science says, like, sing with people, eat with people, find some place to dance, do board games, right? Cheer for football teams, whatever it is, meditate together. That will get you. Go to farmers markets, you find it fast. And I love this phrase, Chip. We'll see what you do with it. I was speaking in Tuolumne Meadows to a bunch of rangers before Trump gutted our national parks. This ranger said, she used the phrase ephemeral community. And I was like, that's wisdom, right? Like everywhere you go, you can find that ephemeral community. And then when people go to Mia and they have 7 days of it, that will last, and then you build with the offerings that you have. That's what we need. And so that's what we need in the middle of life is awe and ephemeral community and rediscovering the moral beauty of the people around us.
If you're enjoying the conversations we've been having on the Midlife Chrysalis, I have a valuable offer for you to consider. My book, Learning to Love Midlife, 12 Reasons Why Life Gets Better with Age, is a national bestseller. And right now, you can get a copy for just the cost of shipping. It offers stories, research, and practices to help you move from a midlife crisis to a midlife catalyst and see this stage of life not as a decline, but an opportunity to flourish. Claim your copy today at meawisdom.com/midlife book. How does someone pursue an awe walk? And what's the data on that shows that it's good for your health?
Oh man. And I have a new story to tell you. Uh, yeah, and I forgot. So, humans walk. We are a meandering species. We have pilgrimages and backpacking and, urban walks and et cetera. And so I first did it for Mindful Magazine. They called me up and they're like, how do we practice awe? And I was like, well, we can go on awe walks. And we walked through the Muir Woods and looked at the redwoods. And that's an easy one, right? And so Virginia, and it's awe-inspiring, and when people think about awe, especially outside or in cities, it's often walking, that brings it to us. And Rebecca Solnit wrote about walking as a special form of consciousness. It has a different temporal quality to it, and I agree. So we did an awe walk test with Virginia Sturm, UC San Francisco, people who are over the age of 65. Once a week, they went out on an awe walk, and wherever they were, we just asked them to go find something mysterious and that would fill them with a childlike sense of wonder. And in the other condition, they just did their vigorous walk, right? Which is a good control condition. And they did this once a week for 8 weeks. And over the 8 weeks, our people in their 70s and beyond, they felt less physical distress. When you're in your 60s and 70s and beyond, your body hurts, right? Our people felt less physical pain. They felt kinder towards other people. They felt less self-focused, and it's a great finding where we had them take a selfie on their walk, and in the all walk condition, the picture of the self starts to merge off the photo, it's like disappearing, and they're just more aware of the context they're in. And the important point of the study is they're doing this everywhere. They're doing it in cities, they're doing it in suburbs. Wasn't necessarily the redwoods, right? It was just life. And just recently, this past week, I was in New York City for a bunch of cities of awe work that we're doing. And Bob McKinnon at the Social Mobility Lab led his city University of New York students on an awe walk through that campus, right? Where you walk by where Colin Powell was a college student there, and then you stand where Langston Hughes is buried, and you just feel the awe of the place. So it's a great thing to think about, like, as I walk, anytime you're walking, where might be a little mystery and awe for you to find? And just go find it. What's an awe walk for you, Chip?
Well, now walk for me, what I do is during COVID, I would take 3 hours a day, 3 days a week, Monday, Wednesday, Friday, 2 to 5. I'd take my dog, Jamie, and we'd go out on what I called spying on the divine. And I would start the walk, and it was always a different walk. So it was all over Baja, there's nobody around, and so I would say at the start of my walk, "Nature, what do you have to teach me today?" And, the key was not having AirPods in, even though I do like walking with AirPods, I will admit it, because I can listen to, podcasts. But what I really wanted to tap into is the divine
Yeah,
and the sense of
yeah.
epiphanies that you can find, and your brain sort of seeing something and like, "Oh, wow, I just had the light bulb go up on top of my head because there's an idea that just came out of just seeing something, being a channel," and so for me, I'll walks it's for me, it's easier in nature, no doubt about it, but I appreciate what you just said about, thinking about who's been there before, walking through the NYU campus or walking somewhere, being in Varanasi, in India, and knowing, like, the history of all of the people who come there to die and live their last days there. So, yeah, awe can come in many forms.
What a good insight.
So your experience with MEA and MIA has been, longstanding, about 8 years now, and you have a workshop coming up in December called Cultivating Awe. I mean, anything that you wanna share about that workshop that's beyond what we've already shared on the podcast?
It's been some of the most gratifying teaching that I've ever done. And, this is you challenged me and you and I thought about this together of like, here's this mysterious emotion. The science is really new, although it's exploded, and a lot of people are talking about all right now. And person might think that this is a rarefied, rare experience of awe. And there are the big experiences. You only get to see Nelson Mandela come out of prison once, or hug the Dalai Lama. But actually, as Einstein said, it's a basic state of consciousness. It's like right there. And so the workshop is really working through the wonders, exploring personally what your narrative, your life story of awe is, who are the people of moral beauty, what music really matters to you, etc. And then I learned this in grief with my brother that if you really set your mind to it, much as with practicing gratitude or mindfulness or kindness, etc., you can cultivate a lot of awe that just stays with you. Just ways of looking at nature, ways of slowing down and listening to music or visual art, ways of thinking about your fellow human beings is how courageous most people are. So, yeah, the workshop takes very seriously, like, yeah, there's a science, but let's come away with some mental habits and some social practices like you're spying on the divine. And now every day I walk to school is awe. There's awe, it's just, and today it was a little red fall leaf on the pavement. And I was just like, wow, look at that color. And I think it's there for us to build.
It's a practice. Yeah, it is definitely a practice. Okay, so last question for you, my friend. MEA does its best to help people see that wisdom is something that's available to them, and that, especially in the era of AI, MEA has been around for 8 years now, and AI was not a big thing back
Oh
then,
my
neither
god.
was longevity, and both of these things, AI and longevity, just are, like, skyrocketed, and so AI is all about knowledge. It's all about the premise that the world's knowledge can, fit on this little damn phone in my pocket. But wisdom is often hard won. It's, my definition of wisdom is metabolized experience mindfully shared for the common good. So you've learned some things along the way, maybe through the school of hard knocks. If someone younger than you came to you, and whether it's in your personal life, your professional life, any part of your life and said, Dacher, I'd love to, get tea with you next week. And what's one wisdom bumper sticker you might come to our tea with? And what's the origin story for it? What would that be?
I have I'm working on a lot of science and a new book on moral beauty, and then I bumped into, and it's interesting, a lot of the great teachers that are the DNA of Mia, the humanism movement, East Asian thought, basic human goodness, you Thich Nhat Hanh, like, we can be lost in the fearful mind, and there's a lot to be frightened of, but every moment there's laughter and synchronization of hearts beating together and humans trying to understand each other and how miraculous that is. I would put on my bumper sticker of wisdom a quote from Eleanor Roosevelt, a leading figure in the UN and the idea of universal human rights, right, which are so vital today in jeopardy, where she said, we have to open our eyes to the simple beauty of people all around us that is so often hidden in something that we don't realize. And I think that, the online life has been an assault on our beliefs about fellow human beings. And then you go to the current discourse and conspiracy theories and all the hate. It's an era of hate. But in reality, humans are remarkable, and once I was a grouchy kid, kind of cynical, and then, as I started to through festivals, and spirit medicines and reading East Asian thought as a teenager, and then, just my whole life has been a revelation and an awakening to the simple beauty all around us. And I think that's what Mia un reveals, and why people are hugging and crying that last few days, is that, and we're wired to do that. We are wired to lose ourselves in the beauty of other people, and we just need to return to that. And so that's what I put on the bumper sticker.
And maybe last question, another question related to that is love. Saul, our shaman down in Baja, he's turned love into a two-syllable word. He says, "Love, love." Do people ask you, why is love not one of the 8, or is love all of the 8?
I've it's interesting, Chip, and I bet you and I'll have a lot to talk about. I've been really interested in agape of late.
Explain what it is for people who don't
Yeah,
know.
in the Christian tradition, but it's really every spiritual tradition. It's like loving all of life and human beings without social distinction. And Jesus, turning to the prostitutes and the outcasts of society, he loved them, loving without social distinction, just divine love, which, the Christian God had, and most people, feel that and believe in it in some realm of their experience. And so, yeah, that's, part of collective effervescence. When you're at Burning Man or you're dancing to the music you love, you're suddenly like, I love everybody here. They're all human. And then it's moral beauty. It's just like, man, loving humanity. So love is a part of the wonders of life.
And you are a wonder of life, my friend.
I can't wait to see you, Chip.
Thank you. I really look forward to seeing you, hopefully over the holidays, or at some point, down in Baja or in the Bay Area. Thank you so, so much.
Thank you for your work, Chip. I mean, for our audience, Chip and I began conversations about awe and Mia when I really dug into the book, and I would not have profiled collective effervescence without you. So I
Yeah,
appreciate it.
well, I do remember that conversation.
Yeah.
I
Oh, yeah.
I hope you enjoyed that as much as I did. Decker and I have this funny relationship. We're just like pals whenever we see each other, and we don't see each other as much lately, because I've been in Santa Fe a little bit more, but I just really enjoy, the conversations we have. At times I feel a little nervous because, he's like a renowned academic. He started the Greater Good Science Center at UC Berkeley. He's He's just very, very well respected as an academic, but he's also very accessible. He's not one of those ivory tower academics. If I were to think about 3 takeaways here, I think the first one is, like, how do we use awe and just seeking awe in our life as a means of letting go of the weight of the world and instead experiencing the wonder of the world? We deserve that. We live in an era in which there's a lot of weightiness. There's a lot of gravitas. There's a lot we are carrying and a lot of baggage. And so to be able to let that go and to see our way out of the ghetto of the ego so that we can see the beauty all around us. When I died at my NDE, that's what the birds told me. I understood bird talk, and the birds were saying to me, Chip, if you slow down, you will see beauty and awe. That is exactly what I heard. And this is what I told the paramedics and the nurses each time I came back from my flatline experience, and that happened 9 times over 90 minutes. So awe is really, fundamental to my life. I love listening for birds these days, even though I don't understand birds now. But when I was in that purgatory state, I could understand what birds were telling me. Number 2 is, it's really interesting, the science of this, and his book, Dacher's book, Awe, was a bestseller, and it's gotten a lot of attention, especially in the MEA community. But his book, Born to Be Good, is actually worth reading. It's a book really that gets into the deep science of what he talked about today, and the fact that who knew that the guy who talked about survival of the fittest also talked about survival of the kindest. Darwin said, as Dacher said, sympathy is our strongest instinct. Sympathy is our strongest instinct. So in a time where it feels like, the brute bullies of the world are taking over in whatever, form that shows up in the world, the idea that the long arc of justice may include compassion and kindness and equanimity is reassuring. And then I think the third thing I really appreciated was just moral beauty. And Dacher, that's the book he's working on right now, a book on moral beauty. And helping people to know the phrase, that 2-word phrase, moral beauty, use it with your friends, talk about it, say that, I want to be in places where I feel the energy of moral beauty around me because it's actually healthy for you. It's good for you. It also leads you, with our mirror neurons in our brain, to actually mirror moral beauty in other people. And so if you can do it, other people can do it, and then you do it back and forth. It's the exchange he talked about. The giving and receiving has the same effect in your brain. The dopamine and effect of just like, oh, that feels good. Maybe I should go ahead and give this back to this person. There's a book, Adam Grant, I think it's called Give and Take, or Givers and Takers, or something like that. He interviewed me for that book, and I'm quoted in the book. Another good book to read. So you've got some good books to read here. You've got Dacher's book, Awe. You have his book, Born to Be Good, and you have Adam Grant's book, Give and Take, I think, or Givers and Takers. That's it. I hope you've enjoyed a little moral beauty on this episode, and look forward to seeing you on the next episode of The Midlife Chrysalis.
Thanks for listening to the Midlife Chrysalis. This show is produced by Midlife Media. If you enjoyed this episode, help us spread the word by subscribing and leaving a review on your favorite platform.